Welcome to Karma's Coils. Today's wild ride involves a responsible man who wakes up to an absolute financial nightmare, completely robbed by his own brother under the silent cover of darkness. We are talking about a devastating 50 grand cleanly wire, transferred to a shady, untraceable crypto wallet, vanishing into thin air before the morning coffee even had a chance to brew. The victim's secure digital sanctuary was aggressively hacked, leaving him staring at absolute pennies in what used to be a robust high-yield savings account. Naturally, the raw adrenaline kicked in, and he immediately reached for his phone to call the local authorities. But then, his dad shut it down. The old man demanded absolute silence over the felony. He stubbornly ordered his successful son to just swallow the massive financial loss, throwing out that manipulative, toxic classic line, "Family protects family at all costs." But here is the magnificent, brilliantly twisted detail the arrogant father completely missed. The stolen cash? It did not actually belong to the victim. It was the aging patriarch's very own secret account built carefully for his golden years. And our main guy? He didn't scream or argue. He just stood there in the shadows and smiled. He knew the entire dynamic of their unbalanced household was about to flip on its head. Strap in tight, grab your headphones. This narrative has layers of deeply satisfying justice. My younger brother completely drained the funds sitting securely under my name. My father's immediate command was to simply ignore the massive loss. He genuinely told me I had a good enough income to just absorb the hit. I didn't reach for my phone to dial 911. Instead, I simply smiled in the dark, because those missing funds were not my personal safety net, they were actually Dad's. I am Arthur. I am 38 years old. During standard business hours, I work as a senior financial analyst at a downtown corporate firm, and during my evenings, I handle private wealth management for a handful of independent contractors. In my specific line of work, mid-October is not just a seasonal deadline, it is a grueling endurance test where regular sleep becomes a mythical concept and dark roast coffee functions as an essential blood type. It was Tuesday, October 12th. I was isolated in my home office, basically drowning in an ocean of quarterly client expense reports and 4 unwashed ceramic mugs. You know that specific state of delirium where the physical mess around you turns completely invisible because you have been trapped inside that exact spot for 2 straight weeks? That was my reality. The only illumination cutting through the suffocating darkness was the harsh, unforgiving blue glow from my dual monitors. The digital clock in the corner of the screen read 2:15 a.m., My eyes felt exactly like they were lined with coarse sandpaper. I was practically hovering my finger over the shutdown button, ready to finally collapse into bed, when my cell phone aggressively buzzed against the mahogany desk. It was not a casual ping. It was that rapid, relentless vibration that instantly tells your central nervous system something is terribly wrong. I glanced down, fully expecting a frantic message from a panicked client. Instead, I saw a high-priority fraud notification. Transaction initiated, minus $50,000. Destination, an unregulated crypto wallet. Funds successfully wire transferred. I stared blankly at the screen. My brain was running purely on fumes, and it took a brutally agonizing 10 seconds for the sheer scale of that number to fully register in my mind. Then, my spine snapped perfectly straight against the chair. Every single ounce of exhaustion vanished in a microsecond. A freezing sharp spike of pure adrenaline punched straight through my chest cavity. I frantically grabbed the mouse, my hands physically trembling so badly I had to retype my secure master password 3 separate times just to access the banking portal. The main dashboard slowly rendered on the monitor. My eyes locked onto the specific portfolio ending in 4,490. The remaining balance was precisely $17.50. My absolute first instinct was a sophisticated overseas identity theft. I naturally assumed some brilliant, faceless stranger operating out of a dark internet cafe halfway across the globe had successfully breached my network firewall. It is literally my daily profession to meticulously track moving money, so I knew exactly where to look for the digital breadcrumbs. I immediately pulled up my main router access history. I was fully braced to see an anonymous proxy IP address originating from a foreign continent. Instead, I saw a familiar device name clearly logged on the glowing screen. Tyler's MacBook Air. I stopped breathing. I literally stopped inhaling oxygen. I just stared at those distinct letters until the pixels started to physically blur together. Tyler, my perpetually drifting younger brother, had been crashing at my parents' suburban house for the past 4 months after his latest landlord officially evicted him. My parents only live about a 20-minute drive away from my condo. 8 months ago, during a casual family dinner, I had foolishly given Tyler my Wi-Fi password so he could stream a movie. His laptop must have automatically reconnected to my local network from the street, or he simply parked outside my building in the dark. I aggressively dug deeper into the system data. I pulled up the remote desktop logs. He had actively utilized a commercial screen-sharing tool to quietly infiltrate my workstation. He probably just guessed my primary password. I had stupidly used a nostalgic variation of our childhood golden retriever's name for my basic local login. He used that access to authorize the massive transfer. My own flesh and blood hacked my machine. The violent rage that instantly washed over me was not a fiery, explosive heat. It was absolute, paralyzing ice. It originated deep in my stomach and slowly crawled outward to freeze the very tips of my fingers. I did not smash my keyboard. I did not throw my coffee mug against the wall. I simply picked up my cell phone and dialed his number. It rang and rang. Finally, a heavily groggy, annoyed voice picked up. "Hello? Tyler," I said. My voice sounded entirely foreign to my own ears. It was dangerously calm, practically mechanical. "Did you enjoy the transfer?" Dead. Suffocating silence on the line. Then, the distinct rustling of heavy blankets as he frantically sat up in bed. He pathetically attempted to play dumb for about 30 agonizing seconds before I coldly informed him that I was literally staring at the IP data, his specific device name, and the exact timestamp of the crime. His tone shifted instantaneously from fake confusion to aggressive defensiveness. That is Tyler's signature survival tactic in literally every single confrontation he has ever faced in his miserable life. He brazenly insisted he didn't steal anything, he just borrowed it. He swore he had a guaranteed foolproof tip. Some revolutionary new altcoin that was mathematically guaranteed to skyrocket to the moon. He desperately claimed he was going to magically put the principal back before I even woke up for breakfast. He begged me to just trust his visionary process. I ordered him to reverse the transaction immediately. He couldn't. He admitted he had already locked the 50 grand into a binding smart contract for an unchangeable 2-4-hour hold. But he arrogantly promised that by tomorrow evening it would balloon to 100 grand, and he would generously give me back 60 for my trouble. I hung up the phone without another word. I was literally hovering my index finger over the glowing emergency keypad on my phone screen, perfectly ready to dial the police and report a massive financial theft, when my device instantly buzzed again. It wasn't the local precinct calling to confirm a fraud report. It was my father. Tyler, being the absolute coward that he intrinsically is, hadn't even waited for me to hang up the line. He had immediately sprinted down the carpeted hallway of their suburban home and frantically woken up our father before I could even initiate a formal legal response. My father's voice on the other end was rough from sleep, but brutally firm. It possessed that heavy, suffocating certainty he always utilized when he wanted to crush a legitimate argument before it even properly began. "Do not call the authorities, Arthur," he commanded. "Dad, he stole 50 grand. He infiltrated my private network," I replied, my voice shaking with a toxic mix of disbelief and sheer exhaustion. "I know." "He woke me up." He confessed, my father interrupted smoothly, completely waving away the felony. "He panicked. He made a terrible mistake. He is just under a lot of pressure right now with his current living situation." And then he delivered the exact sentence that permanently altered my perception of our so-called family dynamic. "You are not going to ruin your own brother's future over a temporary money issue." I took a deep, shuddering breath. "I am reporting him. This is a severe crime." When Dad shut it down, his tone dropped an entire octave, morphing from a stern paternal request into an icy, undeniable threat. "If you involve the police," he growled, the anger vibrating heavily through the speaker, "you will never step foot inside this family house again. You will be dead to your mother and me. He is your blood brother. Family protects family. You get in your car right now and drive over here. We will fix this mess privately." I stood completely still in my freezing dark home office. The stark, empty balance of $17.50 was still violently mocking me from the bright computer monitor. I felt an overwhelming wave of profound injustice. The arrogant thief gets a warm shield, while the innocent victim gets a vicious ultimatum. And then, a very specific, sharp realization cut through my burning anger. I thought intensely about the exact portfolio Tyler had just mindlessly drained to fund his delusional crypto fantasy. "Okay," I said, my voice suddenly very hollow, completely devoid of any resistance. "I will be there in 20 minutes. I grabbed my car keys from the kitchen counter. I entirely abandoned the idea of calling the police. I didn't back down because his threat genuinely intimidated me. I stopped because, as I walked down the empty, silent hallway toward the building's elevator, I vividly remembered the true origin of that specific portfolio, and a slow, dark smile crept across my face in the shadows. I realized that neither my arrogant father nor my foolish brother had any idea what they had actually just destroyed. Hold on just a second, I need to briefly step out of the narrative here. For all the dedicated listeners tuning in, this is the host jumping in, not Arthur. Let's dissect the absolute audacity of this situation. His reckless brother, let's call him Captain Blockchain, just brazenly robbed his own flesh and blood using a sophisticated digital infiltration tool he had quietly set up months in advance. This wasn't an accidental wrong click on an app. He methodically planned this heist. And when he inevitably got caught red-handed, his immediate instinctive reaction wasn't deep remorse. It was to launch into a sweaty, high-pressure sales pitch about a miraculous digital coin, acting like he was moderating a late-night Reddit financial forum instead of admitting to a massive felony. The guy committed a serious federal crime and immediately pivoted into a desperate, aggressive telemarketer. But here is the truly fascinating detail that nobody standing in that tense suburban living room understands yet. The 50 grand didn't actually belong to our guy, Arthur. That single buried fact is about to exponentially magnify the chaos for everyone involved, except, of course, for Arthur. Let's get back into his perspective. To truly grasp why I felt a strange sense of calm satisfaction instead of overwhelming panic during that dark drive over to their house, you need to understand the hidden history of that specific portfolio. I have perpetually played the role of the remarkably reliable, intensely responsible son in our household. I was the boring one, according to Tyler. I secured the prestigious university degree, became a certified financial analyst, landed the stable corporate gig, diligently funded my 401k, and maintained a flawless credit score. Tyler, on the other hand, was the celebrated wild spirit. That is the deeply romanticized label my mother constantly used to excuse his chaotic lifestyle. He dramatically dropped out of community college halfway through his sophomore year to launch an aggressively marketed drop-shipping enterprise that sold cheap fitness gear. It crashed violently. He later pivoted to high-risk day trading, burning through his meager savings in weeks. He even attempted to become a luxury travel influencer. That particular disaster failed so spectacularly that my extended relatives still occasionally whisper about it during tense Thanksgiving dinners. Every single time Tyler spectacularly crashed his life into a brick wall, my father was always right there waiting with a heavy fire extinguisher and an open, extremely generous checkbook. Tyler is just finding his path. Cut him some slack. He merely needs one lucky break, Dad would constantly preach. But approximately 3 years ago, a massive shift occurred in my father's financial reality. He unexpectedly inherited a large, seemingly useless tract of barren land in rural Arizona from a distant, forgotten uncle. As luck would have it, a major energy corporation desperately needed to secure the mineral rights beneath it. My father quietly negotiated a lucrative sale. He walked away with roughly $250,000 in pure, unadulterated cash after settling all the relevant taxes. He never breathed a word about this windfall to my mother. He absolutely, positively never mentioned it to Tyler. Instead, he nervously called me. He invited me to an upscale downtown steakhouse, an extravagant gesture he had literally never made before. He ordered a black coffee, stared intensely at me from across the heavy oak table, and slowly slid a massive cashier's check toward my plate. "I need a massive favor, Arthur," he stated quietly. I stared down at the impossible number written on the paper. "This is my ultimate safety net, my actual, private retirement fund, not the pathetic scraps your mother and I have scraped together in our joint checking," he confessed, leaning uncomfortably close and significantly lowering his voice. "If your mother discovers this money, she will instantly demand we gut the kitchen for a remodel or book a luxury European cruise, if Tyler finds out." He physically shuddered, completely unable to even finish the horrific thought. He desperately needed me to formally open an account entirely under my own legal name. He wanted me to actively manage it, quietly invest it, and keep it utterly invisible from the rest of the family. He offered me a generous 5% cut of the generated interest as a silent management fee. To the IRS and any prying eyes, it would simply look like my own aggressive personal saving strategy. "I trust you implicitly," he told me that afternoon. "You have always been the smart, dependable one." That specific phrase was the emotional hook. I had subconsciously been starving to hear that exact validation from my father for my entire existence. So, I foolishly agreed. I dutifully opened the high-yield portfolio entirely under my own name and quietly labeled it Project Omega in my heavily encrypted personal spreadsheet. Over the next 3 years, Dad had occasionally requested small, discreet withdrawals for what he vaguely termed sudden emergencies, but for the most part, the bulk of the cash just sat there, steadily growing through conservative compound interest. By mid-October of this year, the account held exactly $50,000 in highly liquid, easily accessible cash. I had responsibly locked the remaining balance away in long-term, extremely stable municipal bonds. My actual, hard-earned personal savings were safely housed at an entirely different banking institution across town, specifically to prevent any accidental commingling of funds. I had been intensely disciplined about maintaining that absolute separation from the very first day. Tyler, being fundamentally lazy and operating in a frantic rush, had blindly grabbed the most accessible liquid cash he could quickly find on my dashboard. He smugly thought he was stealing directly from his boring, wealthy older brother. And Dad? Dad fiercely thought he was protecting his precious golden boy from the severe legal consequences of stealing from me. Neither of those two fools realized they were currently engaging in a vicious, high-stakes battle over Dad's very own, fiercely guarded retirement fund. And as I smoothly navigated my sedan through the quiet, empty suburban streets at 3 a.m., holding all of that explosive truth tightly in my head, I carefully practiced my facial expression in the rearview mirror. I perfected a look of profound sadness, defeated compliance, and deep betrayal. I crafted the exact face of a loyal son who just got ruthlessly beaten down by his own family and painfully accepts it. If my father wanted to aggressively play his manipulative family protects family card all the way to its logical, destructive conclusion, I was fully prepared to let him deal the final hand. The heavy oak front door of my childhood home creaked open at exactly 3 a.m. The entire house violently reeked of cheap, stale coffee and suffocating, palpable stress when I slowly stepped into the foyer. My mother was blissfully asleep upstairs. My father had meticulously kept this catastrophic disaster entirely quiet from her, determined to protect his precious secret account from her inevitable scrutiny. In the dimly lit living room, my father was standing rigidly by the brick fireplace in his old navy bathrobe, his arms tightly crossed in a highly defensive posture. Tyler was slumped pathetically on the vintage leather couch, his head buried deep in his hands, his eyes heavily red-rimmed. Whether those tears were genuine remorse or carefully performed manipulation, I have honestly never been able to tell. With Tyler, the acting is usually a solid 50-50 split. Dad's overwhelming fury wasn't directed at the actual thief sitting right in front of him. It was entirely directed at the massive inconvenience of the situation, and more specifically, at me. He aggressively ran the entire familiar script. Tyler merely made a foolish mistake. He is drowning in debt. He is utterly desperate. "Look at your life, Arthur," my father demanded, gesturing wildly toward me. "You have the luxury condo, the diverse investments, the big corporate promotion. You have no children, zero massive debt." And then came the specific line that genuinely, physically floored me. "Don't be greedy, Arthur." He actually looked me dead in the eye and said that. I am the innocent victim standing exhausted in his living room at 3 in the morning, and I am the one being harshly lectured about not being greedy. I let out a dry, quiet, barely audible laugh, and then he ruthlessly hit his main bargaining point. If I called the authorities, Tyler immediately goes to a federal prison. His future is permanently destroyed. Did I really want to carry the heavy burden of being the singular reason my own brother possessed a permanent criminal record? Did I truly want to break our poor mother's fragile heart? "So, what exactly are you proposing here?" I asked, my voice completely flat. "I just eat the massive loss?" Dad forcefully squared his shoulders. Yes, you let it completely go. Consider it a charitable contribution. A vital contribution to saving your younger brother. He will eventually pay you back. He confidently said this, knowing full well it was an absolute lie. All three of us sitting in that room knew it was a total fabrication. Tyler would never repay a single dime. I slowly looked over at Tyler. He was nervously watching me through his trembling fingers, holding his breath exactly like a terrified child, waiting to find out if he is getting a severe punishment or a scoop of ice cream. I looked back at my father defiant, completely, arrogantly certain that he possessed the supreme moral authority to arbitrarily redistribute my hard-earned wealth simply because he was the patriarch, and that is just how his twisted world worked. Okay, I said softly. My father blinked rapidly. He clearly hadn't expected my total surrender to be that remarkably easy. You want me to completely let it go? I stated again, deliberately speaking much slower this time. Treat this missing $50,000 as a generous gift to get Tyler out of his legal trouble. Do not actively seek any financial repayment. Do not involve the authorities. That is exactly what you are demanding from me, as my father? Yes, Dad heavily exhaled, visibly relaxing his tense shoulders. Exactly. That is the honorable, right thing to do. That is what a good, loyal brother does. And you swear to it? I said, looking him directly, piercingly in the eye. You swear that we never, ever speak of this specific money again? The debt is permanently settled? Done? I promise, my father firmly declared. It is buried, gone. I slowly reached into my winter coat pocket and pulled out my cell phone. I told them both I was formally turning off the banking fraud alert. In reality, I was actually hitting the red stop button on the high-definition voice recording application I had secretly started the exact moment I walked through the front door. I turned around and drove home in the dark. I let them blindly think they had won. Let's pause right here. For the listeners, this is still the host jumping back in, not Arthur. I genuinely need a moment to process this level of genius. This man casually walked into a highly hostile room at 3 a.m., where his own father was actively, aggressively shielding the very criminal who just robbed him. He stayed completely calm, agreed to every single ridiculous demand, and secretly recorded the entire disastrous interaction on his smartphone. That is not just basic restraint. That is operating at a masterful, calculating level entirely. His dad smugly thought he was brokering a majestic family peace deal. What he was actually doing was blindly signing a devastating document that would inevitably come back to entirely destroy him. And the truly beautiful part? The old man was genuinely, deeply proud of himself. Anyway, this is the exact moment where Arthur stops merely reacting to the chaos and starts methodically building his fortress. The next morning, the sun rose, and I felt infinitely more awake than I had in the past 6 months. I officially called in sick to the corporate firm, which wasn't entirely a lie, given my mental state, and immediately set up an emergency coffee meeting with my closest friend, Sarah. We had been tight since our brutal undergrad years. She is currently a ruthless corporate contract lawyer, sharp as a razor, and she was the absolute only living person outside of my immediate family who actually knew about Dad's hidden cash. Why? Because I had wisely hired her 3 years ago to help me properly draft the original informal management paperwork which, ironically, Dad had stubbornly refused to ever sign because he was terrified of leaving a traceable paper trail. We met at a bustling, noisy cafe downtown, geographically far removed from anywhere my dad or Tyler might casually wander. I quietly played her the secret audio recording. She listened intensely, her espresso mug hovering halfway to her mouth, completely frozen. When the playback finally finished, she slowly set the mug down on the table. "Arthur," she whispered, her eyes wide, "this is absolutely diabolical. I genuinely love it. But you need to immediately, legally cover yourself. Technically, you are the sole custodian of that specific portfolio. If your father suddenly realizes the truth and tries to maliciously come after you for severe negligence or gross mismanagement of funds, you need ironclad, documented proof that he explicitly, personally authorized this exact outcome." "That is exactly why I am sitting here with you," I replied. "How do I securely lock him into this trap without accidentally tipping him off about the true nature of the missing funds?" Sarah rhythmically tapped her expensive silver pen against the wooden table for a few tense seconds. We need an email confirmation. It must be vague enough not to trigger his intense paranoia about his hidden nest egg, but undeniably specific enough to legally identify the exact $50,000 transaction. We spent the next intensive hour drafting the perfect, legally bulletproof email. The subject line was casual, resolving last night's issue. The meticulously crafted body formally confirmed that, explicitly per his direct verbal request, I was officially canceling any formal police report regarding the unauthorized, massive transfer of $50,000 from the specific savings account under my direct management on October 12th. I clearly reiterated that I thoroughly understood he desperately wanted this treated entirely as family assistance for Tyler and absolutely not as a legitimate debt requiring any future repayment. I smoothly closed it by falsely stating, I hoped it helped Tyler quickly get back on his feet. I confidently hit send. Exactly 2 hours later, Dad eagerly replied, Thanks, son. Truly proud of you. Let's move forward. Do not bring this up to your mother. Sarah slowly read the reply over my shoulder and gave me a firm, satisfied nod. You are completely insulated. He explicitly, in writing, authorized the total forgiveness of the debt. He foolishly thinks he is clearing a massive balance you are personally owed. The carefully worded phrase, savings account under my management, flawlessly covers the secret fund without ever actually naming it. That exact afternoon, I drove straight to the bank, my actual, legitimate banking institution, where my real personal wealth securely lived. I systematically moved every single dollar to a completely different, highly secure institution. I aggressively set up advanced two-factor authentication, utilizing a physical hardware key. I systematically changed every single digital password I owned, ran a full, deep-level virus scan, forcefully wiped my laptop's entire hard drive clean, and reinstalled a brand new operating system from absolute scratch. I meticulously scrubbed Tyler's filthy digital fingerprints out of my existence entirely. That very same night, my phone buzzed with an incoming text message. It was from Tyler. Hey bro, crypto completely crashed. Lost it all. Sorry, but thanks for being cool about it. Dad says you're a hero, LOL. Lost it all. Of course he did. There was never a miraculous, foolproof sure thing. He had either blindly dumped the entire $50,000 into a fraudulent, heavily promoted pump and dump scheme run by teenagers, or he had just made the absolute dumbest, most reckless possible digital move with it. With Tyler, both catastrophic options are equally likely. But it was the LOL at the very end of the message that told me absolutely everything I needed to know about his pathetic mindset. He genuinely thought he had gotten away incredibly clean. He smugly believed that the personal bank of Arthur operated with a permanent, guilt-free, zero-penalty withdrawal policy. I didn't bother to reply. I simply made myself a fresh, hot cup of dark roast coffee, sat quietly out on my high-rise balcony, and peacefully waited. I waited because I knew my father's predictable financial pattern. He would safely ignore the existence of the secret fund for months. He would let it sit quietly, letting himself feel intensely wealthy and secure. But eventually, inevitably, his greed would kick in. He would want to actively move it. He would enthusiastically find some can't-miss investment deal. He always did. It took exactly 3 long, quiet years. Hold on. Stop the story. Let me jump back in here as the host. I truly need to deeply appreciate the sheer audacity of this moment for a second. Captain Blockchain, the guy who has spectacularly failed at dropshipping, high-risk day trading, and embarrassing influencer content, casually sent an LOL in his formal apology text after stealing $50,000. An actual, literal LOL. What is his next brilliant move? A glowing Yelp review of his own family heist, 3 stars. The victim was way too calm. Would definitely rob again. Meanwhile, Arthur is out here quietly, methodically rebuilding his entire digital security infrastructure from the ground up, while Dad arrogantly thinks his oldest son is just sitting in his condo sulking over the money. He is not sulking. He is patiently waiting. Because in 3 years, Dad is going to aggressively go looking for his massive retirement cushion. And Arthur already knows exactly what that printed bank statement currently says. The calculated, icy patience on this guy is truly something else. All right, let's get back into the timeline. Let's fast forward to the drop. Summer rolled in, heavily and hot. The cold silence between me and my family quickly became extremely comfortable, for me at least. I abruptly stopped attending those tense, forced Sunday dinners. I casually told Mom I was permanently buried under corporate work. Dad didn't push it at all. He probably smugly figured I was still bitterly stinging about the lost cash. And honestly, I genuinely think he liked that dynamic. It fed his massive ego. He truly thought he had successfully handled and defeated me. August 14th, 10:30 inches the morning. Dad aggressively called my personal cell while I was sitting at my corporate desk. He was breathless, practically vibrating with excitement. He had discovered a prime commercial property, a desperate foreclosure situation, an incredibly motivated seller, and cold, hard cash was needed immediately. He intensely wanted to pull the entire balance from the hidden fund and wire it directly that very evening so he could aggressively show dominant proof of funds the next morning. "It is the absolute deal of a lifetime," he enthusiastically declared over the phone. "Pull every single dollar." "Sure, Dad," I said, my voice completely smooth. "I will be over there right at 7. I hung up the receiver and sat perfectly still for a second, just listening to the soft, rhythmic hum of the office AC unit. Then, I slowly printed out the final, official bank statement for the portfolio ending in 4,490. I meticulously slid it into a crisp, brown manila envelope and quietly put the envelope into my leather briefcase. I drove over to the suburban house that evening. The atmosphere inside possessed a falsely festive energy. Mom was conveniently out at her weekly book club, which is precisely when Dad always calculatedly timed these shady financial discussions. Tyler was comfortably sprawled on the couch, mindlessly eating a massive slice of pepperoni pizza, looking completely relaxed. The October incident from 3 years ago had clearly become ancient, irrelevant history for him. Absolutely zero consequences will reliably do that to a weak person's character. Dad enthusiastically greeted me at the front door with a wide, arrogant grin. He handed me a cold water and immediately started loudly talking about permanently retiring next spring, buying a luxury pontoon boat, and finally doing what he had always loudly promised he would. He was already aggressively spending the ghost money in his head before it was even legally in his hands. "All right," he aggressively declared, vigorously rubbing his palms together. "Open up the magic box, Arthur. Let's see the grand total. With 3 years of solid interest, we should be sitting incredibly pretty." I carefully set my heavy leather briefcase squarely on the polished dining table. Tyler lazily wandered over, still loudly chewing, holding the greasy pizza slice. "Can I get a tiny cut of this for my ongoing emotional support?" he joked, completely devoid of shame. I did not smile. I clicked open the briefcase. I did not pull out a sleek laptop. I slowly, deliberately took out the thin manila envelope. "I didn't bring the computer," I stated calmly, "but I brought the latest, official statement." Dad looked instantly confused. "Why? We need to digitally transfer it tonight." "Read it first." I smoothly slid the envelope across the dark wood. Dad impatiently picked it up, ripped open the flap, pulled out the single white sheet of paper, and nervously adjusted his reading glasses. The heavy silence that immediately followed was suffocatingly thick. You could have physically wrung the tension out of the air. "Arthur," his voice was suddenly incredibly thin, wavering with raw uncertainty. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" "No joke," I replied flatly. "It legally says the remaining balance is—" I let the sentence hang. He slowly looked up, his eyes wide, completely glassy and terrified. $17.50. "Where is the rest?" Dad whispered, his voice cracking. "There should be over 50 grand in here, way over." Tyler instantly stopped chewing. He looked blankly at the paper, then directly at me. The healthy color left his face entirely, draining away until he looked sickly pale. He slowly dropped the half-eaten pizza crust back onto his paper plate. "It was aggressively withdrawn," I stated clearly. "October 12th. 3 years ago." Dad's heavy brow deeply furrowed, his aging brain desperately, slowly trying to connect the terrifying dots. It really, truly did not want to connect them. "October 12th. That's the—" He violently froze. He slowly turned his head to look directly at Tyler. Tyler's face instantly went the sickening color of spoiled milk. "That was the exact night Tyler hacked my computer," I said, my voice slicing through the silence like a scalpel. "The night he forcefully wire transferred $50,000 to a shady crypto exchange. Dad shook his head slowly, repeatedly, looking exactly like a desperate man trying to solve a complex math equation while the solid floor was rapidly falling out from underneath him. But that was your money. We explicitly agreed that was your personal savings account. You blindly assumed it was my personal savings, I corrected him, keeping my voice absolutely flat and devastatingly steady. I never once said that. Tyler hacked the specific account ending in 4,490. That is the exact account you secretly asked me to open. That is Project Omega. That is your entire hidden retirement fund. Dad made a horrific, guttural sound I had never once heard from him before. A strangled, high-pitched, desperate wheeze. He violently gripped the hard edge of the dining table with both trembling hands. You. He violently pointed a shaking finger directly at my chest. You just let him? You specifically told me to. I fired back instantly, stepping closer. You forcefully told me to completely let it go. You arrogantly told me, don't be greedy. You demanded that family protects family. You ordered me to legally write it off as a charitable contribution to saving my poor brother. I thought it was your damn money. Dad's voice cracked violently into a scream. He violently swept his glass off the table, and it shattered explosively against the drywall. You tricked me. I did precisely what you angrily demanded, I said, standing up perfectly straight, towering over his panic. You relentlessly insisted I formally forgive the massive debt. You even sent me an official email legally confirming it. Proud of you, son. Let's move forward. Those were your exact, documented words. Dad slowly, terrifyingly turned to look at Tyler. Tyler was already desperately backing away toward the kitchen doorway, his hands raised in surrender. I didn't know, Tyler stammered, his voice pathetic. I swear to God I thought it was his money. I thought he was loaded. You threw my entire retirement into a fake crypto scam, Dad roared, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. It was an accident, Tyler shrieked. You stole from your own father. Wait. Let me get this incredibly straight because this exact situation deserves a profound moment of reflection. Captain Blockchain, the very guy who has spectacularly failed at every single minor business venture he has ever touched, just accidentally drained the one specific portfolio that was quietly protecting his aging dad's entire financial future. And his pathetic, panicked defense? I thought he was loaded. That is not a valid legal defense. That is a delusional social media bio. Arthur, a responsible man who was brutally robbed by his own brother in the dead of night, now gets to watch the ultimate karma unfold. Meanwhile, the aging father, who actively spent his entire adult years aggressively shielding this wild spirit from every single logical consequence on the planet, is now helplessly watching his massive nest egg evaporate in real time in his own suburban dining room on a random Tuesday. The absolute irony is that the exact night where Dad shut it down to protect the thief from the police is the exact night he signed his own financial death warrant. The arrogant man who literally coined the phrase, family protects family, just violently discovered his precious family blindly helped themselves to his own life savings. It is the ultimate family peace deal gone completely, explosively nuclear, beautiful. And we are not even done yet. Dad violently lunged at Tyler. It wasn't cinematic or graceful. It was just desperate, clumsy, and raw. A frantic, shaking grab at the stretched collar of his faded t-shirt. They aggressively stumbled backward into the living room. A heavy ceramic floor lamp violently crashed over, shattering into pieces. I stood perfectly still in the dining room doorway and just calmly watched them. I did not move a single muscle to intervene. Not immediately. Tyler roughly shoved the old man off him. Dad stumbled heavily backward, collapsing onto the vintage leather couch, breathing incredibly hard, his left hand pressed tightly to his chest in pure panic. I did step forward right then. Stop it, I commanded, my voice cutting through the chaos. Both of you. Tyler was already crying. Real, pathetic tears this time. Ugly, full-body sobbing, the exact kind you physically cannot fake. He slowly looked up at me. Arthur, please help me. Tell him it was just a massive misunderstanding. I looked deeply at my younger brother, the exact same person who had endlessly used me, casually ignored my boundaries, and then brutally stolen from me. The one who was always instantly hiding behind our father, the exact second anything in his life went slightly wrong. "I cannot help you, Tyler," I stated coldly. "I am just the greedy one, remember?" He scrambled up, ran frantically out the front door, and sprinted down the lawn. His car engine roared to life, and he recklessly peeled out of the concrete driveway into the night. A suffocating, heavy silence slowly settled back into the destroyed room. Dad sat slumped on the couch, his head buried in his trembling hands. He suddenly looked incredibly old in a profound way I had never once noticed before, physically smaller, utterly defeated. When he finally looked up, his wrinkled eyes were wet. "Arthur," he whispered. He could barely force the single word out of his throat. "Fix this, please. I know you have your own extensive personal funds. You have to save me. If your mother finds out—" "Mom isn't going to find out from me," I replied evenly. "But I am absolutely not giving you a single dime." "How can you be so ruthlessly cruel?" he sobbed, his voice shaking. "I am your own father." I slowly pointed to the empty front doorway. "You aggressively taught me that family protects family. Well, you just thoroughly protected him. You generously gave him $50,000 of your very own retirement money. You should be incredibly proud." "It wasn't a gift!" he screamed. "It was only a gift when I firmly thought it was your money." "And it only became a devastating theft," I replied, "when it instantly turned out to be yours." I calmly picked up my heavy leather briefcase from the dining table. "Where are you going?" he gasped, blind panic rising rapidly in his thin voice. "You cannot just abandon me here." "I really do not know, Dad," I said, my tone completely indifferent. "Maybe you should have deeply thought about that precise scenario before you aggressively told an innocent victim to shut up and just take the loss." I walked steadily toward the heavy front door. "Arthur!" His voice cracked violently. "If you walk out that door right now, do not ever come back." I stopped with my hand on the brass knob. I slowly turned around one last time. "Dad," I said quietly, "you aggressively used that exact same threat 3 years ago. It worked perfectly back then. It does not work right now. Because I have clearly realized something vital. I do not need you. You desperately need me. And you just permanently lost me." I gently, quietly closed the heavy front door behind me. My hands were absolutely not shaking on the dark drive back to my condo, not even a single little bit. I smoothly merged onto the empty highway, instantly feeling profoundly lighter than I had in years, perhaps even decades. It felt exactly like I had finally set down a massive, incredibly heavy backpack I had been unknowingly carrying since I was a small kid, and I hadn't even consciously noticed the crushing weight of it until it was completely gone. The frantic text messages and desperate phone calls immediately started exploding on my screen before I even hit the very first exit ramp. Dad intensely pleading, Tyler totally panicking. I did not block their numbers right away. I genuinely wanted to watch the severe incoming consequences actually land in real time. The 50 grand was permanently gone, and I had clearly known that devastating fact since October. But sitting quietly there in the leather driver's seat, watching the glittering city skyline open up ahead of me, I peacefully realized it was honestly the absolute best money I had ever spent. It officially bought me something I hadn't possessed in 38 years, my own unburdened life. 14 months of absolute, strict no-contact passed. I permanently blocked the unknown incoming numbers. I let the specific ones I easily recognized ring out to my voicemail exactly twice, strictly so they clearly knew I had actively seen the call, and then I delivered pure, absolute silence after that. I am not going to confidently tell you it was completely painless. There is definitely a small, buried version of me that silently mourned the supportive family he desperately wished he had. But that specific version of me also possesses significantly worse savings and a remarkably worse sleep schedule, so we absolutely do not let him make the executive decisions. Then, D. Martha unexpectedly showed up. It was a crisp Saturday morning in late fall. I was peacefully standing out on my high-rise balcony with a double espresso, just quietly watching the bustling city slowly come to life. My building intercom suddenly buzzed loudly. I casually checked the security feed and instantly saw a severe woman wearing a large sun hat and massive, oversized sunglasses, suspiciously moving exactly like someone who confidently believed they were being incredibly subtle. It was Aunt Martha, Dad's older sister, the family's self-appointed designated message carrier, and the aggressive, unofficial historian of everyone else's private business. I probably should have just ignored it and let it ring out, honestly, But morbid curiosity is an incredibly difficult thing to actively resist when you have been completely in the dark for well over a year. I hit the button and buzzed her up. She stiffly sat down on my clean white leather couch and aggressively looked around the minimalist apartment with an intense expression that somehow brilliantly managed to be both deeply impressed and highly offended at the exact same time. She tightly clutched her expensive designer purse, exactly like it had highly sensitive legal evidence securely hidden inside it. "You have clearly done very, very well for yourself, Arthur," she finally stated. Her sharp tone made the compliment sound exactly like a vicious accusation. I quietly set a small glass coaster down on the table for her sparkling water. I absolutely did not offer her any coffee. Fresh coffee is strictly reserved for welcome guests who are actually planning to stay a while. She immediately ran through the standard, predictable family script. I had ruthlessly abandoned the family. I had coldly turned my back right in their absolute darkest hour. How could I possibly sleep at night? How could I live with myself? I patiently let her completely finish her prepared monologue. "I simply removed myself from an active crime scene, Martha," I smoothly replied, my tone completely, legally bulletproof. "There is a massive difference. How are they doing?" She aggressively leaned forward with the exact look of someone who had been excitedly saving this horrific news for this precise, dramatic moment. Dad had completely lost the suburban house, the exact one my parents had lived in for over 30 years. After I quietly left that explosive night, he had become utterly, dangerously obsessed with that sketchy commercial property deal, completely convinced it was his absolute only way to rapidly recoup the massive loss. He had recklessly put their family home up as heavy collateral to securely guarantee a predatory hard money loan. He threw absolutely everything he had left right into it. But the so-called deal of a lifetime turned out to have a massive hidden lien on it that he hadn't properly discovered. The entire deal aggressively collapsed. The other investors instantly pulled out, the ruthless lenders came aggressively collecting, and he had literally nothing left because his precious hidden fund was permanently gone. Last she heard, he was driving late nights for a rideshare app out of a cheap, run-down Route 9 motel, pathetically telling anyone who listened that he was simply consulting. Mom had been forced to abruptly move into a tiny, cramped apartment near her local church. She had had to publicly resign from the prestigious garden club board, which, according to Martha, was actually the far more devastating social loss. And Tyler? He had instantly fled the state before anyone could formally serve him with any legal papers. He stole Dad's only remaining car, right before the aggressive bank forcefully repossessed it, and frantically drove straight south. The absolute last anyone had heard, he was hiding out in humid Florida, waiting tables at a diner, and desperately dodging aggressive subpoenas. Some very dangerous people were apparently still actively looking for him down there, and they definitely were not the kind of people you simply call the bank to complain about. Then, Martha looked at me directly, her eyes narrowing, and delivered exactly what she had actually come to demand. "Arthur, your father is 70 years old. He is driving total strangers around at 3 in the morning just to pay for a filthy motel room. Your poor mother is barely surviving on a meager Social Security check. And here you are." She aggressively gestured around my pristine apartment. "One single check from you could instantly get your mother into a nice, safe place. It could get your exhausted father permanently off the dangerous road." I looked at her steadily for a very long, quiet moment. "Aunt Martha," I finally said softly, "do you truly know exactly why I didn't aggressively call the police that specific night?" "Because your father desperately begged you not to," she snapped back instantly. "No," I replied smoothly. "Because I genuinely wanted them to actually painfully learn something. Dad arrogantly spent his entire adult life aggressively bailing Tyler out with money he was secretly hiding from his own wife. He actively used me as the silent vault, and he used Tyler as the pathetic excuse. When that vault violently got robbed, Dad's immediate toxic instinct was to fiercely protect the arrogant thief and aggressively silence the innocent victim. If I quietly write a massive check right now, what exactly happens next week? Does Dad finally learn? Does Tyler magically change? They have suffered enough, she practically yelled. My absolute compassion, I stated clearly, was generously giving them a very real choice. Dad actively chose Tyler over me. He aggressively chose to permanently cover up a federal felony over respecting my basic dignity. He forcefully told me to completely let it go. I slowly stood up from the armchair. So, I let it go. I let them all go. I am absolutely not rescuing anyone here today. I am permanently ending the cycle. Martha sharply stood up, her heavily powdered face completely flushed with anger. You are cold, Arthur. Ice cold. Your father was absolutely right about you. You truly care far more about cold money than your own blood. No, I said calmly, politely walking her straight toward the front door. I care entirely about my own peace, and I paid $50,000 for it. I genuinely think that is an extremely fair market price. She aggressively stormed out. I quietly watched the heavy elevator doors completely close on her shocked, disgusted expression. I walked peacefully back out to the sunlit balcony. There was still one final, very loose end I had completely never told anyone about. When Dad initially forced me to set up the secret fund, he had explicitly promised me a generous 5% cut of the generated interest as a silent management fee. I had aggressively, properly managed the money, swiftly moving it into high-yield bonds and index funds long before Tyler violently drained the accessible liquid cash. The massive original principal was what got brutally stolen and lost. But the actual interest I had intelligently generated over 3 years? I had meticulously, quietly swept that exact amount into a completely separate, heavily encrypted sub-account every single quarter, just as a matter of extremely clean standard accounting practice. Tyler hadn't even touched it. He completely didn't know it legally existed. It was precisely $14,200. Technically, it was Dad's money. Technically, it was my legally earned fee, a very genuine, massive gray area. But I absolutely did not want any gray areas in my life anymore. I intensely didn't want a single dirty dollar of that toxic fund permanently mixed into my clean new life. I meticulously made out a large cashier's check directly to a reputable gambling addiction recovery foundation. I cleanly sealed the heavy envelope, walked peacefully down to the lobby mailbox, and casually dropped it right in. Clack. Final. 3 quiet years have passed now. Mom and Dad are officially bitterly divorced. It turns out that when you completely lose the family house, and your wife finally discovers the massive secret fund you aggressively hid from her for years, the fragile marriage absolutely does not survive that horrific conversation. Mom is currently living in a quiet senior community. We casually talk occasionally, very surface level, very carefully. She still quietly blames me a little bit. She honestly cannot fully help it. It is just the toxic wiring she grew up with. But she finally respects the hard distance. I politely send her nice flowers on her birthday. Dad still aggressively emails me sometimes. It is usually desperate links to highly questionable investment opportunities or absolute garbage he has enthusiastically read online. Arthur, vigorously look at this gold IRA. This one is completely different. He has not changed at all. He is still desperately hunting for the magical shortcut, still hunting the magic move that will magically undo 30 years of terrible, arrogant decisions. I instantly drag every single one of them straight to the spam folder without ever opening them. And Tyler? He finally got arrested in a humid county in Georgia. Aggressive check fraud. A minor charge as these chaotic things usually go, but it was definitively enough to finally put his actual fingerprints permanently in the criminal system. He desperately called me collect straight from the county jail. I stood there and calmly stared at the glowing phone screen for a full, quiet minute. Inmate call from Tyler. Would you like to accept the charges? I firmly pressed decline. That was honestly the absolute hardest moment. Significantly harder than the actual night of the massive theft, honestly. Because it was the exact moment I finally accepted that I could never, ever save him. Dad had arrogantly spent 30 years aggressively trying to save him, and absolutely all it produced was a broken man who genuinely believed the entire world simply owed him everything without a single receipt. If I had answered that desperate call, I would not be actively helping him. I would just become the brand new enabler, the brand new dad. So I peacefully let it ring out. My life right now? I officially landed the senior director promotion at the corporate firm. My annual salary has nearly doubled since that chaotic October night. My personal investments are thriving quietly and securely. I share my days with an incredible woman named Elena. She knows the entire exhausting history of my family, and unlike my own blood relatives, she profoundly respects that I possess a firm boundary I absolutely refuse to negotiate past. My daily existence is deeply stable and gloriously boring in the best possible way. Dad viciously called me greedy that night. He aggressively wielded that specific word, like a blunt weapon. But let's take a hard, honest look at what greed actually represents. Greed is not having a healthy financial cushion. Greed is not demanding basic justice when someone takes what you worked tirelessly for. Greed is feeling inherently entitled to consume what isn't yours, simply because earning it seemed like way too much effort. Greed is deliberately deceiving your spouse for years and then loudly demanding someone else bleed to cover your massive losses. Greed is demanding a person set themselves on fire strictly so you can stay comfortably warm for one more fleeting hour. The concept of relatives helping each other is a beautiful, real thing, but only when that loyalty flows naturally in both directions. When it exclusively flows one way, it is absolutely not a moral value. It is merely a predatory collection strategy. I paid $50,000 to learn that permanent lesson. Honestly, it remains the absolute greatest investment of my entire life. Look, Arthur is not a perfect saint. He made a highly calculated, icy decision and let that invisible clock aggressively tick for years while he built his fortress. But here is the absolute truth of the matter. A man who steals from you, and a father who fiercely covers it up, are never actually asking for your compassion. They are demanding your blind compliance. And the exact moment you deeply realize you are not morally obligated to indefinitely fund someone else's toxic chaos, your entire world changes for the better. That final exit line he dropped at the front door, quiet, zero drama. I don't need you, you need me, and you just lost me. That is not cruelty. That is simply a man who finally stopped shrinking himself to fit into a broken room. So, if you are the responsible one, the heavy lifter who constantly absorbs the devastating impact and gets labeled greedy for just wanting what you rightfully earned, remember this. You are not a human ATM with a built-in family plan. You are a person, and your peace of mind matters just as much as theirs does. I want to hear from all of you. Have you ever had to draw a terrifyingly hard line with a relative over finances? Have you been forced to walk away to protect your own sanity? Drop your raw take in the comments below. What would you have done in Arthur's shoes? And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss the next wild story here on Karma's Coils.